This episode of Storycomic Presents is sponsored by JanusPointPress.com. Watch out for wormholes. Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 317. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and talented comic creator of O Kingdom Come, D Ajayi.
Nailed
Hey,
it.
D.
Yes, sir.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
Right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Been excited to sit down and talk to you about O Kingdom Come. This is a story that doesn't really take place. It's kind of like on a world adjacent to ours, or is this something that actually is specifically in our world here?
Yeah, it's a historical fiction. So
Okay.
it would take place along the kingdoms of the Nile. So before pharaohs, I was really intrigued with that time period. Before the pharaohs is more about the old kingdom. And this were the tribes that were not really heard about along the Nile, further down the Nile, because when you hear about the Nile, you think Egypt, but the Nile runs through Uganda, the Nile runs through Tanzania, the Nile runs through the Democratic of Congo. So these are all these kingdoms that had access to the Nile, and they weren't really mentioned among the other ones that is commonly associated with that time period.
What about that storyline? What about that geographic area that kind of made you create this story?
That's a good question. I loved it was like a melting pot of cultures, especially for that time period. And being from Nigeria, that's like the melting pot of cultures of the continent. So I was already writing like an African ancient kingdom political um, story. And in my research, I stumbled upon the Nubians. And I was like, oh, wow, if there was anything that fits, it's definitely this. So I did some research, reached out to a lot of researchers, Ranako Rashidi, um, and I read up on a lot of Ben Henry Clark, and I found a beautiful story that fit within the kingdom and the infighting that eventually led to its demise.
And so, because it says book one, so there is going to be other stories on this. And how did you kind of split this up into having? How did you decide how book one ends as compared to going on to a second book?
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I had actually written very George
Okay.
Lucas. Like I've actually written 4, 5, 6 uh in like I originally was going to start with a 4, 5, 6. So when I decided to pursue a graphic novel approach, I was like, you know what, I need a more intimate story before this big odyssey, and I wanted to focus on this kingdom, the Zari kingdom, attempting to lay siege on Nubia in this case.
Okay.
So that intimate story is more of the books that lead up to 4, 5, and 6.
You mentioned it's historical fiction, so is it historical? We know as location, but is also historical and actual the names that are you using of figures, or all the the characters in here complete or fictionalized?
Good question. So the characters were a mix. So a big thing that happens in Africa that a lot of people don't know about outside, you probably know more than most, but like names get reused a lot out of a parents like wanting their child to reach this level of acclaim. So they'll name their child like, you know, Barney Smith. You know what I'm saying? They'll rename, knowing a Barney, they'll rename Barney. So I wanted to play with that idea that these aren't the person you might know this person to be may not be the original version of this character when they were given this name. So there is a mix of names you've heard of, and there's a mix of some names that you haven't heard of. Like
Okay.
people say like Cleopatra the Seventh. I'm like, there's seven. They'll be like, oh, Cleopatra wasn't this. I'm like, there's seven of them. Which one wasn't this that you're that you're so sure of? So and that's just in recorded history. There's seven. So
Right.
that concept of the name, that's definitely that person. That's definitely King Pa. it's just likely not true, just given how far ago it happened. So it
Right.
was that kind of fiction. So it's a mixture of characters that you've definitely heard the name in history, and some of them that you haven't.
What made you decide to make this a historical fiction as compared to making it something that might feel a bit more cinematic in a
Mm.
sense? Or
I liked when I was writing it, it was gonna be more. I like how the history grounds it.
mm,
So I really wanted the idea of this kingdom that everybody wants, without having to go into description of why everybody wants it. Everybody wants Nubia. They still want it now. They wanted it then. It was the
right.
first monarchy on when I did my research. I'm like, first monarchy in history, and no one knows about that. So everybody wants Nubia, and it explains itself. So I really wanted to. After I found that out, I was like, okay, so I can build around that, because everybody already will have an inkling of understanding why there's this desire for this location, for the history attached to it. So
Mm,
that's why I went with more of a historical fiction. And I loved Last Kingdom, which was another retelling of how England was formed. Um,
right.
I loved Last Kingdom. So that was another thing. I was like, oh, you know what? Like, this could have just been another random tribes of England, but with the formation of England, it grounded it so everybody knows why they want this so bad.
As you're doing your research and kind of creating the story arc,
Yeah.
what are some of the surprises that you learned about history?
Oh man, I learned a lot about the Sudan, um, the Nuba people. The linguistically, a lot
Mm,
of the words that were used along then are still being used in a lot of different tribes. Um, that's probably the thing I was most impressed with was like the Mande people. They have a creation myth about I think a god that I forgot, I don't know how to say it in a nice way, but he basically put his semen into the water to form life,
yeah.
and the god's name is Pharaoh. And I'm like, wait a minute,
Pharaoh?
Pharaoh. It's Pharo. It's literally Pharaoh. The guy's name is Pharaoh. I'm like, okay. So did people just, and just how language over time becomes language and becomes a title? Could there have been a people that worshipped a god, Pharaoh, and then it became a title that someone claimed for themselves? Absolutely.
Right.
It happens in tribes all the time. So that was surprising linguistically, and just seeing how something could have started off small and became like a religion. It's I fell in love with history writing this book. I wasn't really a big history buff, but I was like, wow, this is really incredible. How things change, especially when enough time is given, thousands of years and years. How something can change and become like law, just with persistence.
So how do you change when it comes to that? How do you decide what's going to be historical and what's going to be fiction as you're putting these stories together? As you put
That's
this book
good,
together.
very good question. I think that uh, being around the people, checking with the experts, of course, but more importantly, being around the people, um, and the tribes, you get in a sense of what won't offend.
Mm,
Um, so I like to play in the box of what won't offend. What can I play with that won't offend? One big thing I did was a lot of the tribes, especially if they're being portrayed in somewhat bad light. I made some fictional tribes, but you'll probably spot some that have similar customs to other tribes, and because like a tribe is often like the Igbo people are often assigned to being tight fisted with money, right? So that I'm not gonna make a tribe about the Evos, yeah, about in my story about them being. I have a fictional tribe that has that kind of a custom, but there's a reason for it too. So
mm.
that was something I really wanted to explore without offending. One big thing that happened while I was writing this was the Woman King, and they made all of the Oyo Empire like evil, and I was like, dude, what are you doing? It's literally the biggest city on the continent. You can't just make people. You just can't make them evil. That's not. There's got to be some nuance They were just evil, like, oh, we're gonna kill and sell everybody. But yeah, they made them evil. So that's something I want to make sure didn't happen. Writing it, be a little more cautious of stuff like that.
Did you find it easier or harder to create the backgrounds of the cultures or the history of the cultures, because it's not like it's all fictional, you're actually using actual places? So like you
Correct.
mentioned, from the sensitivity piece, how
Yeah.
were you able to draft that?
I think it was pretty easy. I mean, it, we're I'm not introducing anything that isn't well known. So like, if I say that to an Igbo person about being tight fisted, they won't be offended.
Right.
Um, they'll understand where it's coming from, but you have to be nuanced about it. So why? So like, I have the Zari people, and they're known for being greedy. But they're known for being greedy because they've lost everything. So this it's a
Right.
kingdom that had a lot, and now they've lost everything. So it's about introducing the balance of this cardinal sin, but why is it that way? Um, I think when you give the balance and let's okay, you kind of understand every form of why someone could be like that. So there's not
Right.
really uh, uh, a bad side. I like playing with gray. So there's not, and it's a war. So in war, I don't really believe if there's people dying on both sides are bad.
Yeah.
So I think that once you lay that out and you give people their own kind of decide for yourself, then you're kind of out of the seat of saying, oh, this person's bad, this person's good. So
Right.
that's kind of the seat I took. Like, here, you decide, like, with
And
what you have.
how did you decide as the creator of the story, this is where the story is going to end for book one, and then it's going to pick up in book two and stuff like that?
Oh, that's a great question. So there's a night that was very impactful for the rest of the story of 4, 5, and 6. So for these first books before 5, 5, and 6 are about that night. So uh, I'm there's a main character for the most part. You'll find out that the arc is following for books 1, 2, and 3, and he has a pretty like the arc is kind of completed by the third book because
Mm.
I wanted to make sure that that impact that's felt through 4, 5, and 6 is really hits. So it was good to follow that character through 1, 2, and 3. I think I'm giving away too much. You're sneaky. You're giving away too much.
So basically, as you're talking about as a book, does it kind of follow geographically? The storyline follows the river, and then 4, 5, 6 is that end? So it's basically book one and book two.
Yeah, so it follows so we're following a main tribe now, because I want to give the tribes enough time. I don't want them to become plot points. They're just like, oh, there's that, magical elephant over there. Um
Right.
I wanted to give tribes so you can actually, feel where they're coming from with their direction. Because this is really about everybody wanting this kingdom, um, or this status, and how the different ways people go about getting to it. Um,
Mm.
so I'm following a main tribe for the beginning of the book, and then the tribe that they're trying to get to, or the kingdom they're trying to get to, is takes over the story kind of from there.
Watch out for wormholes, because a good book is a wormhole, whether it's paper or pixels. Explore our artist books and chapbooks, including the winning 2022 Chautauqua Janus Prize Lecture at januspointpress.com. And sign up for news of our upcoming sci-fi, sensual, and literary collection, Event Horizon. This short story collection on cosmic decisions and their impact is written by award-winning author Stephanie Nina Pizzarillos and features comics, prose, photography, and original canvas work by an array of exciting artists. Visit januspointpress.com. How were you able to write this? Did you write it as a comic script first, or did you write it as a long prose? And how did you do that? And my second part to that question is, how did how were you able to find the artists for that? Because you
Oh
did
man,
mention before we went live, your artist is amazing.
Yeah, he did a great job. I actually had written I have a one note full of stories. But I had written a short. I've been writing stuff since I was a kid, like 8, 9. My sister's in film. My other sister works for Essence, so she writes. I come from like a writing family for the most part, and I would always want to write stuff to try and impress my older sisters. So I'd be like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" She's like, "Yeah, this is great. I just don't have 250 million for you to make it." So that's what she'd always say to me. So I wrote a smaller story, really intimate, called A Fatherhood Tale." That's about a father that's having trouble connecting with his daughter. And she
Okay.
loved it. She's like, "Wow, this is great. Like, this is actually, we can do it. Let's shoot this." I'm like, "What? What do you mean shoot? Let's shoot." So yeah, let's shoot this. I'll come to Orlando. We'll shoot it. So we actually shot that. And while we are shooting it, we met up with some people for executive production, and they're like, "Oh wow, this is a good script. Are you working on anything else?" And I was like, "Well, I have this African kingdom story. It might cost a little bit of money to make." They're like, "Yeah, something like that. You probably want to have a following. That have you considered a book, a light novel?"
Mm.
I was like, "Oh, okay. I could probably try a novel. I wouldn't mind trying that out." And then I was in the process of it, and I was like, "Man, my descriptions are so long." And I was like, I'm describing things for pages and pages, because I want people to not overlook uh, certain aspects of the culture that you haven't
Right.
experienced. It's so hard to describe some things to people for the first time. So I feel like I could get away with that with a graphic novel. I feel like I can get into the fabrics. I can show you uh, uh, some things that would have taken a lot longer to describe, and you would be more at the mercy of the imagination of me and the artist, rather than us being at the mercy of whoever the reader is. Um,
Right.
so that's why we did. That's why I went for a graphic novel. I think it was a good move. And then the artist. I went online. I made a post. I got some concept art done from an artist I really liked. He couldn't commit to the long term goal of a full book. He said he was working on his own book. I'm like, we're gonna do this together. Come on. But he's like, no, I'm working on my own book and all that. So I kept looking, and Clovis actually messages me. He's like, hey, I saw some of the concept. I would love to work on this. That Brazil, we have a big African population, and my parents are Yoruba priest. I'm like, what, really? So I understood that I wouldn't have to take so much time describing things as much just from that. And I just gave him, okay, try this test page, and it was phenomenal. I was blown away. And it was just, yeah, you're the guy. And then
Wow.
same with the colorists. I actually saw the colorist work. I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Can you do like a more silky kind of coloring style? He's like, oh, yeah, I could try that. And he colored it, and he actually elevated the work even higher. And I was like, wow. And that was it. I'm like, you guys are mine for the next year. Don't go anywhere. So yeah, we just kept knocking out pages. Even for book 2, we just kept going. We didn't stop. So
So when's book 2 going to be available?
but it'll be available next year. I'm gonna finish.
Wow. Okay.
I finished book 1 this year, April. Went to a few cons, um, and did with it what I want with it. Seeing like I'm like, oh, do I want to do traditional publishing, stuff like that? They all want you to sign off on movie stuff. I'm like, can we just do the
Right.
book without can we just do the book without the movie stuff? I don't want to give up any rights or anything like that. So I'll do book 2
Right.
next year. Yeah.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
Especially a
And
big
so
book. You don't want to wait too long for like
right.
it's not like a issue 1 or anything, which is good. Something meaty words that you can sit on and you can go back and read. That's really what I wanted to go for.
And so once that project is over, is there, because we're talking before we went on the air, is that there's Africa is made up of 54 countries, and it's so different.
It is.
Do you feel as though now that, with the success of O Kingdom Come, that there's a sense of wanting to kind of like promote the history of other parts of Africa, where like in West Africa and North Africa, well,
I agree.
like Southern Africa and things like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I like There's another studio. I think you've had him on here. Very good friend of mine, Peter. What he's
Yep.
doing at Peta Studios, incredible. He had a book called Allowed You. Oh my
Hmm.
god, I love this book. I
I
love this
have
book.
it. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
I love that book. I always tell him how much it's important to me, and we kind of just like he saw my Kickstarter for my last book. And he's like, dude, what is this? He's like, uh, what was the? He loved a line from the video. He was like, God, like man fears God, and God fears. I was like, yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. So he loved that line, and since then we've always kept chatting. But I love Allowed You. So stuff like that, really unique concepts that aren't done, that haven't really been done. I think that will help us stick out way more. I feel
Right.
like we're trying to follow a model that's already been in place, and it might be a little tighter for us to get in there. But these stories that are not really being done, I mean, sword and sorcery, that's a whole other. John, most of my book sales are from novel readers, so
Right.
it's a whole other group out there of people that can be introduced to this kind of storytelling. So Allowed You, I love what he's doing. Um, there's a guy that does the Comic Con in Ibadan. He has a book coming out. So like really, a lot of the books that have like a just different perspective, a different point of view, a different. Those are the ones I really like clutch onto. So I think there's definitely room for all those books to explode.
Right. Exactly. Because comic books is a medium, not a genre, and
Correct.
being able to like hold on to this "O Kingdom Come" is as you follow the Nile River. Um, what other aspects that you learn, geographically speaking, that you hope that will translate well into a graphic novel format?
Oh man, that's a really good question. There's so much stuff. My wife, we met in high school. She talks about how like the elders always believe that there's like a world there's like a world in the tree, there's a world under the water, there's a world like that there's a belief of that, like stuff like that. Like there's whole worlds of stuff to explore there. One big thing that I was really intrigued about in my research, even not even the pyramids. I love that. I don't know if it's every year, but there is a set time period where the Nile overflows. It overflows into all the vegetation, and it's like a renewal, and then it goes back. I love the spirituality behind that. I love that concept that it overflows. It kind of washes away your whole your year or whatever, and then you get to start again. I love that idea of being anew. And it's so symbolic, and it really really fits. I explored a bit in the book, but it really really fits a lot of stuff in the region, and just storytelling wise. There's like so much that you can talk about, even between there, even the walls of Benny. There's, I mean, untouched potential of stuff to talk about the entire region across all of it. The most intriguing thing I found out was that the Nile ran through all those other countries that
Right.
that aren't really mentioned. I'm like, Kenya doesn't talk about the Nile, like it's right there, and they don't talk about it at all. So I really want to touch on those other cultures. Like this must have meant something at some time. This massive waterway that, like you said, runs from south north.
Right.
That must have really had a powerful impact on trade, even outside of the spiritual, on
Right.
trade, on just strategic location. So that's something
Mhm.
that I just wanted to play with the entire time.
Was there anything part in the script or some of your ideas that you had that didn't make the cut because it just didn't fit in the story, but you kind of wished it did because it's a really good piece of
There was an
piece of
original,
history?
and yeah, there was an original beginning I had with between the conflict that I'm gonna keep for later. Because I'm a more of a, they always say like, what's the biggest thing for a writer? It's restraint. For me, it's restraint. I don't want to,
Right.
because I want to get to this next thing, but I don't want to just drown you in all this. I want you to actually take it with you. So yeah, there was restraint. I'm like, it just doesn't work here, and you just gotta step aside, outside of yourself, and be like, it just doesn't work here. All right, put it somewhere else. So yeah, I do that quite a bit, and I'm not shy to do that. I want the best product, so
Right.
I gotta step out of myself, read. I'm like, just no. Just can't fit here. We got to put it somewhere else. Just can't do it. Just can't do it, Barney.
You say it's like 6 books total is going to be, and you're going to be doing them once. Basically, you're trying to get them produced once a year.
Yeah, I think once a year will be pretty easy to turn out. Book 2 is already almost done coloring. The lettering is the fun part, and then yeah, once a year is probably pretty easy to meet. And that's one big thing that when I always try to get feedback from other consumers, other creators, is them trying to keep up with production. Because like an issue, 24 pages every year, that's tough. That's tough. Especially for so long story format is what I'm like. I always try and tell them, like, are you open to maybe doing a long story format? It's a little more expensive, but it kind of pays off in the long run because people can go back to your book. I always like hearing how people. I've read this 3-4 times. So that lets people go back to your book a lot more than consuming the shorter format quicker.
So basically, how big is the book then?
Book 1's 132 pages.
132?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And it is, I had to say it twice to make sure I heard you right, 132 pages.
Yes, it's 132. So, it's like there's so I took advantage of that. There's probably 3 splash pages of double page art in there. There's quotes in there from other literary experts. I did a homage to Runoko Rashidi. He passed away before the book could be done. I did a shout out at the end. So it's an experience. So like you're not going to be reading every page, but I want you to be able to experience every page. You got to take every page in.
So you're putting out, you want to do 2 books, a book a year. So you're still talking about sending out a 132 page book every year?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it'll be done in 6 years then, so it's 6 years. If you're doing
for
a
all
book
6
a year.
Books?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say so. Even the third, so I would say the third book is my Avengers Endgame. You're not gonna want to rush into book 4 after the third book. So it's a completion of an arc. So will I jump in and do 4 immediately? I don't know. Maybe it depends. But 1, 2, and 3 will come out concurrently.
Okay, because that 6 years is a good chunk of time to.
Yeah, 6 years that's a long time. Because even 4, 5, and 6, I've written out the outline for the most part. But I still gotta do it per panel. I still gotta I haven't broken it down 4, 5, and 6 in that. 1, 2, and 3 is plenty for me to sit on for a year or 2 before we jump into 4. Just depending on response or what's gonna happen with it. 1, 2, and 3 is plenty of work.
Right, that's a lot of work. Yeah,
it's a lot of work. It's plenty of work. Go back and read it again.
And you're doing that through like through a crowdfunding campaign as well for book 2?
Book 1 I did through crowdfunding. With the people I've been talking to, we'll see if I do that with book 2. But I do want to do a completion of book 1 this year. I'm gonna do like a last crowdfunding with a hardcover for this year. So that one's gonna be pretty special.
Right.
Yeah.
And so tell me, D, if people want to learn more about O Kingdom Come, or if people want to learn more about you, where's the best place they could go to?
I'm locked in O Kingdom Come, so it's O Kingdom Come everywhere.
Okay.
When I'm working on something else, I give a different title, but right now it's O Kingdom Come. So O Kingdom Come, Twitter or X, awful name, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. It's all O Kingdom Come on everything.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Well, yes, D, this has been great. I'm really excited about the book. Really excited that book 2 is already on the way. So yeah,
I appreciate it. Yeah, it was a lot of work, and I'm glad it's being well received so far.
Right, and you're gonna have to come back on when book 2 is out.
Book 2, absolutely, man. I might be Clovis. Maybe Clovis wants to chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great to have you both on. That'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. 317 episodes. How? Just how? How?
Well, I was going to say the same thing. 132-page book every year.
Yeah,
See how?
not the same, not comparable.
All right. Thanks a lot, D.
Of course, thank you.